sprint review and demo session, and I will be posting it on the Dev Exchange YouTube channel, which is visible to the public. So if you have any concerns, feel free to tell me that now or after the meeting and before I post it so that I can address your concerns. And if you want to look at past videos or past recordings, you can go to the Dev Exchange channel. The link is in the email invite, and you should be able to see the last 5 sprint review recordings there. I'd also like to acknowledge that most of us in Victoria are conducting much of our government business and live in the traditional territories of the Lekwungen-speaking people, today known as the Songhees and the Esquimalt First Nations, and also from the traditional territories of the Wasanich peoples. I also want to acknowledge that some of us on this call may be joining us from other traditional territories. So today present here is our sprint, our Scrum team. Myself, Mars Romer, as the Scrum Master for the team, and product owner Elizabeth Vanderbiesen, who's sitting in the boardroom there. The development team consists of Dave Shively, Mike Stevens, Natalie Russell, Katie Sloan, who's also an alternate product owner when Elizabeth isn't available. We've also added Brandy Dixon recently this sprint to our team. She's taken the week off, so she's not here with us today, but we're super happy to have us have her join us. And we're also super happy to have Sarah Blake back on a development team as of yesterday. So welcome to 2 new people to our 2 people back to our team, 1 person back, 1 new to our team. As you probably are aware, our product team is working on a handbook that we're calling the Developers Handbook, which ministry clients can use to develop an operational records classification schedule if they wish to use their own resources instead of waiting for an archivist and citizen services to become available to do so. The idea here is that there would still be support from citizen services in terms of guidance and advice, but bulk of the work would be done and completed by the ministry clients using this handbook as a guide. If you've never been to a sprint review before, I just want to quickly tell you a sprint review is an informal meeting between the Scrum team as well as the key stakeholders. It is held at the end of our 3-week sprint, during which time our team is planning, designing, developing, and releasing the next iteration of the Developers Handbook. The live link to the handbook is also in the meeting invite if you wish to look at that on your own time. And currently that handbook is residing on the GRS Learning site. The purpose of this meeting is to demonstrate the latest work that we are doing on the product and to give our stakeholders an update on our progress, as well as to collect any initial feedback that you may want to give us. This feedback will be useful to us in planning and designing the handbook for future sprints, but it's not your only opportunity for you as stakeholders to give us feedback. You can contact us at any time. We can take your call. We can look at it in emails, however you wish. Contact our product owners, Katie and Elizabeth, if you wish to give us feedback. We may also from time to time reach out to our stakeholders for that feedback. That's all I had to say. Elizabeth, was there anything that I missed that you'd want to fill in there?
The only thing I'll say is because we do have some new people joining us, we're going to be just demonstrating what we've done in this last sprint. But if you want, once you go to the site, feel free to look through previous material that starts right from what we call ORCS readiness and evaluating whether or not you actually need a schedule or an amendment. So feel free to go through the materials and provide us feedback.
Excellent. Thanks, Elizabeth. I'm going to now turn it over to Katie for the demo.
Yeah, okay. Thanks, Mars. I'm so sorry. My computer is doing weird things today, so I'm a bit distracted. So let's get my head back in the game here. So thanks, Mars, and also thanks to Elizabeth and everyone who's on the call right now. We appreciate you being here. So similarly with Mars, I just would also like to acknowledge that I'm also speaking to you all today from the traditional territories of the Lekwungen peoples, on whose traditional territory we gather and who are known today as the Songhees and Esquimalt First Nations. I'm grateful to be able to have this opportunity to live and work in this beautiful place, and I invite you to reflect and acknowledge the territories where you might be joining us today. So I'm just going to share my screen. Just bear with me here. All right. So the goal for this sprint was for ministry clients to be able to conduct interviews with subject matter experts, or SMEs, as I'll be calling them for the rest of the meeting. In addition, we also provided some information about the different types of ORCS projects, as we realized that we hadn't actually done that in the previous sprints. And finally, we also included an introduction section to information system overviews, which are also called ISOs, which is an important part of the ORCS development process. So really, this sprint is a bit of a mixed bag, but it still mostly falls under that research and analysis tab. We're trying to get that all finished up so we can move on to the schedule development. Yeah, so as I mentioned, we recognized as a group late last sprint that we never actually defined what the different types of ORCS projects there are in the handbook, and that this information might be good for the end user to know. So we decided to remedy that, and we made a section that describes the different types of ORCS projects. So it's under this heading here, maintaining and amending information schedules. I will just mention that there are 3 different types of ORCS projects. We only list 2 here, so we'll make sure that we fix that for the next sprint. But the 3 different types of ORCS projects is, of course, there's a new ORCS projects. So this is for, obviously, if your program area doesn't have an ORCS or only has a draft and nothing's been approved, you may, that would be a new ORCS project where you would request to get an ORCS developed and approved. But the 2 other ones, the 2 other ORCS projects that you may work on are, or you might hear, and you may be wondering what the difference between them are administrative amendments and formal amendments. So from the first day that an ORCS is approved, it already starts to become outdated, especially because government is so fluid. So office names may change, OPR statements may become outdated. The older the ORCS is, the more likely it will need an update at some point. We do actually recommend that the ORCS be looked at within 10 years, just because things always change in government. So, and we want to make sure that the ORCS is kept fresh and is still relevant. So there are the 2 different big types of information, or sorry, of amendment projects are what is called an administrative amendment. So these amendments are any minor changes to a schedule that don't affect the overall scope of coverage, nor do they change any of the retention periods or final dispositions. Administrative amendments also follow a really simplified review and approval process where they don't have to go through IMAC and public consultation. So on the next page here, we have some examples of when you might need an administrative amendment. So things such as like minor word changes, maybe the name of a software has changed, maybe a branch name has been updated or changed. All these things don't actually change the scope of, they're not changing any of the classifications per se, and they're not changing retention periods. They're just kind of making some cosmetic and editorial changes. So in that case, you would apply to have an administrative amendment done to the ORCS. The third type of information schedule project is what's called a formal amendment. And this is, formal amendments are when you need to make significant changes to an already existing approved schedule. So this is where, say if you are collapsing or if you're closing secondaries, if you're doing a significant overhaul, you're changing retention periods, this is a formal amendment because you are changing the scope and retention periods within the ORCS. So it needs to go through a formal amendment process. And with the formal amendments, they do need to go to public consultation, and they are put through IMAC, and the CRO has to sign off on those approvals. Whereas with administrative amendments, the director of archival and records initiatives can sign off on that. So then also we have some criteria listed here of when you need to apply for a formal amendment. So if you're adding or removing primaries or secondaries to the ORCS, if you're making any modifications to the retention of the ORCS, if you're adding a new system overview, if you're changing a final disposition, say from FR to DE, that would definitely be a formal amendment. And if there's any changes to the legislation or you're making changes to approved archival appraisal criteria, so if you're changing from SR to FR, for example. So yeah, those are the different types of ORCS projects. So just to kind of sum up, we have the new ORCS project. So that's if you don't actually have an approved ORCS schedule. That's when you would apply for new ORCS. Admin amendments, so those are just little kind of cosmetic changes that need to happen to the ORCS, but it doesn't actually affect the overall scope and retentions of records in the ORCS. And then the formal amendments where you do have an approved schedule, but it needs a lot of updates and amendments made to it, then you would apply for a formal amendment. So that was just kind of covering some backlog that we didn't actually get to the last few sprints. So now I will move on to the main goal of the sprint, which is conducting interviews with the SMEs. And for that part of the presentation, I will give it over to Natalie.
Great. Thank you, Katie. I will just share my screen now. And okay. And so, yes, so now that we have resolved our backlog and covered the get this out of the way. And yeah, so now that we've covered off the types of uses for this developer's handbook, we're ready to move on to our next steps in actual development. So previously, in previous sprints, we examined the tools that you'll use to generate classifications such as functional analysis, program area documentation, and indented org charts. And now we're ready to actually go into the field to talk to our subject matter experts, or SMEs, as Katie mentioned. So this section here covers off, sort of the way that you'll pursue your interviews with the subject matter experts. And it may differ depending on your position within the organization that you're writing the schedule for, but this just sort of gives a general broad overview of the types of questions you should ask and how you actually get to talk to people, or at least our recommended methods for getting to talk to people. So the background research that you have already conducted will likely inform the questions you ask and will help you to better understand the responses you get. This section discusses how you'll access contact information for SMEs and suggests how to document the interviews. It also provides some key themes to identify in the interviews and a list of suggested questions. So your best source for contact information for SMEs will be the client lead, who will likely be able to recommend people who have expertise in the program area and its functions, and also how their functions relate to other program areas or externally. to the ministry even. The SMEs that you talk to should have a long history with the program area and its records. They should be interested in records management. That is to say, they can help you a lot more with developing your classifications if they're already sort of used to applying ORCS and maybe have already implemented some sort of records management system in their own area. They'll better understand how, what you mean when you explain how you're trying to group the records, and that sort of thing. So yeah, so they should definitely be interested and want to talk about it, and they should be able to explain their function in the program and how it relates to other functions inside or outside the program area or ministry. And you should also try to speak to those in the area who might not be so keen on introducing a new information management system into the program area, because this could be an opportunity both for you to better understand the scope of records management requirements and capabilities, and to promote the advantages of implementing a modernized system. So yes, so this just goes into what I just said in more detail there. And now we're going to look at the interview spreadsheet. One moment, please. So we recommend maintaining a spreadsheet documenting the name of the organization here, the SMEs that you interviewed. So sometimes you might have a one-on-one interview, or you might actually get a group together to discuss, and that can be quite productive. You'll also want to list the titles and roles of each attendee. This is for your future reference, who you might want to go back to for follow-up questions, who might be able to best inform. The date of the meeting, and then some options here. You might want to list the questions that you asked, or at least some of the key questions that you asked, and list the responses here. And then you'll also want to indicate if you need to follow up, either to clarify some answers, or while you're refining your classifications. So yes, and you'll likely, I know for myself, I refer to this quite a bit, especially the part where I have the asked and answered questions, as I'm trying to resolve more complex records management queries. And you certainly don't want to have to keep going back to people and asking them, what did you say when you said when we were talking about this? And so it's nice to have it all in one document, and for future reference as well. So we've also provided, just go back here, we've also provided a list of questions that a list of questions that will help you to better understand the history of the program area, sites of collaboration and overlap, or how to identify records demonstrating evidence of decisions made and actions taken. And also questions relating to records formats and the current arrangement of records. So we've grouped them thematically here, and the list is currently in the handbook. It might be an appendix, but for now we've got the whole lot here. But here we've grouped them thematically. So the history, collaborations, evidence, records formats, and arrangement. If you're already embedded in the organization in a records management role, you may already be in regular contact with SMEs and have a good sense of the operations there. However, a formal interview will uncover more nuanced and specific records activity, so you can more appropriately group the records and describe them. So now I will throw it back to Katie, who's going to tell you about the information system overview section. And I'll just stop sharing.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Natalie. I will just reshare my screen. Just bear with me. And I've lost my mouse. Bear with me again. no, I got it, thanks. It's just joys of technology. Yeah, so thank you, Natalie. So as part of those information interviews that you're going to have with SMEs, an important part, SMEs that you will want to talk to are those people who manages information systems within a program area, because you'll be describing information system. Well, sorry, you'll be required to include an information system overview section for all the systems that a program area is using within their area. So some important SMEs that you may want to talk to include people like data architects, business analysts, and other people within the program area who are very knowledgeable about information systems. So bridging that gap, yeah, so the last part of the demo is to show you an overview introducing the concept of information system overviews, or ISOs. This section is a very important part of an ORCS because it provides a high-level description of the functions and information content of systems being used within a program area. ISOs set out criteria that system administrators can use to develop system purges or transfer routines to when we eventually get the digital archives, they can set up that criteria for all records, data, and other information within an information system. So here, that's just the little thing I was just mentioning. We have in this section just a glossary definition of what an information system is from the RIM manual, the Records Information Manual. And then we introduce the concept or the different elements that are contained within an ISO, just telling you, giving you the title as well as information about what is contained with each element. So I'm not going to go through all of these right now. You can read that on your own time. But we do have an example. Oh, if I can pull it up. I lost my mouse again. Come on. Yeah, so we have a sample here just to kind of guide you, to give you something to contextualize all that information. So for example, if I go back here, and I want to see what the purpose of an information or a purpose of that system is, I can look here. So this provides some information about the system that's being described. So in this case, the system is called Data Innovation Program Task Tracking, or DTTS. It's a bit of a tongue twister. So it gives information about the program. So it says it uses Jira, a cloud-based software program that's used by, that's the name brand. It describes its purpose. So it's an agile project management and collaboration tool. And then it lists some things that the system is used for and what its capabilities are for. So yeah, I won't get into too much detail. I'll let you guys read that for yourselves. But so this section here just describes the different elements of what's contained within an ISO, and gives you some, and then this example here will just give you some more information to help you contextualize what goes into which element. And probably the most important part of a system overview is the data retention plan. So here, this is describing where in the ORCS you can find the classification. So in this case, you would refer to the primary 360010, or the Data Management Registries and Tracking classification if you wanted more information about what type of information is being classified under this section. and then it gives you the data retention period. So in this case, in this example, it says destroy. You can destroy the data when it's no longer required for planning, tracking, reporting, or audit purposes. So yeah, this will help the end user know what classification applies to the information that's being that's contained within these systems, and when they can either either they can destroy the data, or when it needs to be transferred to the digital archives when we eventually hopefully get the digital archives. Yeah. Oh, now my computer is yelling at me. Okay. So yeah. So Natalie and I now have been talking for a bit, and I will hand the proverbial mic over to the group for your comments and feedback. And again, I'll just reiterate what Mars said at the beginning of the meeting, that you can submit your feedback to us at any point. This isn't the only opportunity, because I know we've thrown a lot of information at you right now, and I know for myself, I'm a bit of a thinker, so I like to go and digest and then come back. So at any point, if you have any questions, or you have if you have questions, or you have some feedback, or just general suggestions for us, go ahead and email either Mars or Elizabeth or myself, and we'd be happy to either try to answer your questions or pose it to the group. We're just happy to chat with you anytime. So I will stop sharing my screen and pass it over to the group.
Thanks so much, Katie and Natalie, for that demo. We still have half an hour, so there's lots of time for your feedback. We'd like this meeting to be a two-way communication between us and you. So we're happy to hear your questions, comments, concerns, opinions, whatever it is you've got. And we are taking notes so that we can go back and revisit what you say, so that we can incorporate that into our future sprints. So if you
don't want to,
I want to share with you first. See if I say
so I was just going to say, if it's easier, maybe just because it's hard to be the first one to kind of jump back. So first of all, you can always, type it, and I'm sure someone like Mars or Katie will read it. But maybe to make it easier, maybe we should go piece by piece. So I'm just wondering if there's any comments or questions or feelings about the first part, like when we describe the different types of schedules, the three primary ones: a new schedule, a formal amendment, or an administrative amendment. If there's anything that anybody wants to go back to on that.
I have Terrence here. I have just a question, and again, I really appreciate the work that the group did. With administrative amendments, it's interesting, and I agree that it's almost outdated very quickly. So there's two things that jumped out at me on that. One of them is, it would be really difficult to stay on top of all of the numerous little changes that occur. We've lived for a very long time working with the ORCS that are outdated because of minor administrative amendments. Some of them are more substantial than others. So I guess working with the records officers, they would be able to, the clients would be able to ascertain which ones are worthwhile coming through, because we'd get inundated if we tried to keep up to date with them. The other one that jumped out at me on the administrative amendments was the legislation. Sometimes I find that clients are interested in updating the legislation citation. It's not changing the retention period, it's just changing the SBC to an RSBC if that's updated, or something more innocuous like that, which doesn't really change anything. It's just changing the name of the statute. And so that would be more, in my opinion, an administrative amendment. But here you said it wasn't. And so those are just comments that I have.
So I actually want to that because it's one of my biggest things. So even though an a legislative change might seem very kind of straightforward, without actually digging in and reviewing that legislation to see what impacts it made and changed,
Okay.
Because there's obviously a reason why the legislation went forward for a change. Because we take that deeper dive look at it, it becomes a formal amendment. So it might be an easy, straightforward one, as you say, but because it's a change to actual legislation, it's a formal amendment.
Thank you.
I see some hands up, but I can't see from the room who they are.
It's Sarah Thibault. I think I said your last name wrong, right? Hopefully it's not wrong.
You did. Great job, Mars. I just have a question. When it says in the administrative amendment, it says it omits the public consultation and IMAC review stage. So it means it doesn't go to IMAC. Its approval is done internally with GRS.
Correct.
And so at the next page, just because I don't know if it needs to be reiterated or something, but the next page it says the two types of schedules. Just because I find that the word, like you kind of read it very quickly at the first page, but then when you go to the second page about what does not include, I don't know if it's worth noting in there that it doesn't need to go to IMAC or something like that. I don't know if it's highlighted enough. I think that's a really important piece.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah, and the second thing was just the system overview. Because in the first page it says, I was just reading it here, now I lost it, where system overviews, where did it say? It doesn't need, like it's part of the administrative amendment. But it didn't say it in the other page. Now I lost it, I'm sorry. I don't want to hold up anybody that have a question. Oh, and the formal amendments, it says on the second page here, yeah, where you are right now, adding a new ISO. So if you add a completely new, but if you make just a change to the ISO, that's still an administrative amendment?
It really depends. It depends on what's being changed and what's being updated. If it's just like a little bit of a cosmetic change, like the name of the system changed, or something that doesn't change the overall scope and sorry, words escaping me at the moment.
That's okay. So it can.
Yeah,
so
if it doesn't
depends.
change.
Yeah,
Yeah, if it doesn't
so a
change the
good
scope
example-
or retention, it then it should typically be an admin amendment, right? Elizabeth?
Yeah, so I think the easiest thing, I always like to use examples for these things. So the easiest one is, most people are familiar with Content Manager or trim. So if for some reason you had a schedule and it listed trim over and over and over, but now trim is Content Manager, even though it has some different bells and whistles, it's pretty much used for the same purpose, administrative amendment is fine. But if you're bringing in a new system and that system is either collecting data from somewhere else or sharing data, or how it flows is different, how it's retained, for that reason it would go through a formal, because it's really a new application that's coming in, not just kind of a updated name change or a new version or something like that.
Okay, that makes complete sense. And now I remember why I saw it. It was actually the third page. If you went, if you go over to the next page, because it talks about the what types of changes qualified as administrative amendments, and below it says system section updates. So we're talking about those kind of updates that you just said.
Yeah.
So that's where I got confused, because I thought updates. Okay, does that mean every time you update an ISO, is it a formal? Is it not? So I wasn't too sure. Okay.
So that's good. We'll be clearer on that one.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for answering the question.
All right. So if you have questions, also you can like email and reach out to us. But how about anything about any of the systems overview? Is there any additional? I know that systems overview can be a little bit tricky to kind of wrap your head around sometimes. It's not something that you typically think of when you think of an information schedule. And so I'm just wondering if we addressed it well enough to be kind of comprehended, understood, and it fits in nicely, or if you think we missed something on there. Trevor, you have a question?
Yeah, and it's not really a question, but an observation that relates to your statement there, Elizabeth. You know, in my experience of working with clients, and particularly IMBs, when a systems issue comes up, there's historically been a sense for the IMB business analysts, for example, that the information, retention information on effective policies in the systems overviews for them were rather buried or in the background, or they weren't so aware of their utility, particularly when they were trying to work out what to migrate, what not to, and so on. So just looking at this, it's really reassuring, particularly in that second sentence describing information systems, where it really does speak to the value of the ISO or systems overview to those administrators. And so I think wherever there's an opportunity in how these are talked about here, or implementation and other activities, opportunities to foreground the value of the ISO to those administrators, I think are really key and valuable, particularly because it's such a fluid space and systems and apps developed and decommissioned continuously or evolving, that there's an awareness of this needing to be amended and updated too. So just an observation more than a question. And great silence.
Thanks, Trevor. Anyone have any follow-up comments about that?
Hi, I don't have a follow-up comment, but I do have a question. It's not related specifically to these sections, but it's related to the project on the whole. May I ask?
Definitely.
Okay. So can you help me? I just want to make sure that when I approach clients and I'm describing what this is, that I do a good job of representing it well. So what I'd like to make sure I understand is the handbook is the purpose it serves is for our ministry clients, whether they be program staff or whomever they choose, have a document that will help walk them through the process of development. My question is the thinking that the ministry person, staffer, will do most of the legwork and the research and obviously has a good understanding of either their program area and the records, and that they are compiling the bulk of that information, and they at that point work in partnership with a GRS archivist. So is the thinking that the relationship between the archivist and the ministry staff is they're there as a support when the bulk of the work is being done by the ministry?
I would say yes. I'm actually going to clarify it a bit. So okay. The ministry developer, whether it be employee or contractor, etc., is the developer. So it's not that they do the bulk of the work, they are doing the work. Okay. They are actually the developer. The role of the GRS archivist is to guide them through the process. So when they're struggling, they're not too sure how to approach something, they need a clarification, guidance of any kind, the GRS archivist would help them through the development. The only time that the role kind of changes, which we'll get to in future parts of the handbook, is when it comes to the actual appraisal piece. And that's when it really does become a partnership between the developer and the GRS archivist, where the developer is really explaining everything that's been kind of done to date so that the GRS archivist can do an appraisal for the schedule. but in all terms, they are actually the developer. And the similarity that I've said to clients is it's when you go for procurement. So if you're going forward with an RFP, you would contact procurement services. We want an RFP. They help you determine what kind of contract document you want. Is it an RFP or a CSA or what type of process? And then they guide you through. But the ministry actually is the one who completes all of that work. And so this is the same kind of model for that. And it's not a requirement. Also, I just want to point that out for those that might be new to this. It's not that ministries are now expected to do this. This is just an option for ministries if they actually want to take on that development instead of waiting for a GRS archivist.
And if they ask the question, if they participate and do this, will it happen faster for them than having GRS do all of the work? What should the answer be?
The answer is 100% correct. Yes, it will be, because they are actually doing the work. So what we're doing is giving them the handbook, showing them the tools, guiding them through. And really, we should not, like in the beginning, I think it will, we'll have to go through some growing pains and get people used to it. But really, we should just be kind of like that call center hotline going through, but they are doing 98% of that work. So yes, it's as much time as that they want to invest in it if they want to go forward.
Okay, so the archivist really, the relationship is that of consultation until it reaches appraisal.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and it's one of the things I'll, since you brought it up, Bev, we still ask that it come through GRS so that we know that they're embarking on a development project. So we still ask that they, kind of do that submission form. We go through, and in there we say, do you plan on developing it? Mainly to do that advisory. So they might think that they need a whole new schedule, and we might go, actually, you just need. So in the beginning, we are still working in partnership, and we ask that it go through GRS. And once it does, that's when they get assigned someone in GRS as their support person.
And will there be a plan or something built into the process so that when that happens, that communication with GRS, that the government records officers are linked into that information as well, and to the person who's doing the writing?
It actually starts with the government records officer. So the beginning of the handbook is almost all dedicated to the work between client and the IS team. Right up into when they submit the form and it goes to prioritization committee. And at that point, we tell the records officer and we say a developer has been, or an archivist has been assigned to the developer. And then kind of there's a triangle. So it definitely is a partnership that we're trying to build in addition to this handbook, that the client is working with GRS as a whole. So both the records officer and their support archivist.
Okay, and a request for prioritization is necessary at the get-go.
Correct.
Okay.
Sarah.
Just a follow-up question. That was a great question, Bev. Is there, and forgive me if I didn't see it in there yet. This is my first time joining this meeting. But I don't think I saw it. Is there somewhere in there where it kind of clarifies those roles and responsibilities, maybe identifies it specifically, like what's the GRO's role, what's the developer's role, understanding what you're taking on in the project to make sure that there's, and I did see a section where it says there's going to be a project charter there. So I think that's great, because then we can identify those roles right off the bat. Yeah. But is there a section?
No, it's going to be in the project chart. So we actually have it on our backlog, and it actually does fit into some of the work that we're going to be doing as we move forward. So we do kind of hit to what it is, but we will have actually a piece that says this is a government records officer, ministry records officer, a program area, like all the different kind of roles going through.
Perfect. Yeah, because it would be great to know if you're being assigned, like if there's a point of contact or something like that, so that throughout the project, you know who your point of contact is if you're a ministry, if you're the developer at the ministry. So,
Yeah.
and sorry, Trevor, I see you have your hand up, so I'll be very, very quick on my second follow-up, which is, it is probably a stupid question. There's no timeline, an approximate timeline you can give, right? Like you can't say it'll take approximately this much time to do a minor amendment versus a major amendment.
I'll actually maybe pass that to Natalie and Katie, because we do I'll be honest, we do estimate. So
Okay.
even when we do GRS development ones, we don't estimate necessarily through time, but we say, this will be a smaller one. Usually smaller ones will take, 3 to 6 months, or, this is like a huge one. This is going to take us like 2 to 3 years, right? So we can do estimates, but it really is based on, at least from my perspective, more of our like kind of experience in going through it. But I'm wondering if Katie and Natalie actually have maybe a better response for that one.
we're like right behind each other.
Yeah, we're like.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much that. It's because we can estimate at the outset, but then it seems that even, I think it just goes that someone might apply for an admin amendment, but then once you start digging in, it starts to become a formal amendment, because what looked like a cosmetic change is actually going to, like, say it is a legislative a change be due to legislation. That could mean that there's changes in retention times, or different records need to be managed differently now. So yeah, so we can do an estimate, say that like a small, even formal amendment might be 6 months, but developing a new schedule for a branch might be 18 months or something like that. But you never know until you start digging in what you're going to find. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Natalie. It was just coming off from how much commitment do we need to put in if you do kind of going. That's where the question came out. So I appreciate it. Thanks.
Yes, yeah, no, and that makes sense, because there is an investment, especially if you're contracting a developer or something like that. You do sort of need a timeline.
Yeah. And it's also hard to estimate because not everyone works on a schedule full time. So I think exactly, if it's a contractor that's been brought in just to do it, I think it's easier than someone who, say, is a ministry employee that might be doing this as well as something else. So that kind of impacts it too.
Yeah, and I will just say too, like, it is really hard to kind of give a general timeline, just because there's so many factors at play. There's some things that we don't account for that may come up. There's availability. Sometimes there's availability issues with the program area. Yeah, and it just, like Natalie said, sometimes when we think it's going to be an easy change, we open Pandora's box, and we find out there's a whole list of things that we need to do more research into, or we need to follow up on. So we do sometimes give timelines, but we always caveat, like, these are really subject to change just based on the work and the size of the project and variables that we may not have foreseen when we signed the project charter and got the project going. So it's very fluid works development.
Trevor, you had your hand up.
Yeah, just 2 quick ones. What's your current thinking or thoughts around e-learning orientations, putting the handbook and the experiences in context, much along the lines of your response to Bev's questions? What have you got in mind? And is there any thought to, down the road in the long term, capturing stories, interviews, or characterizations of project experiences, which might be helpful to someone wading in on a project their first time?
I think it would be amazing. I'll be honest, I think it would be hard to do a story interview at this point, just because we haven't had any true ministry developed.
test case.
Yeah, we've had some where the ministry's developed, but it's kind of been more of a partnership development. So we don't really have a good example of that. We do with the BPS, right? But because it's different, I think it's great. I would love to see it. And I think maybe after we get this going and we actually have some ministries going through it, I would love to see that.
And the e-learning piece, is there a plan to kind of produce a front-end kind of framing of the products that users could get a kind of a friendly introduction to? Is that planned?
Yes.
Or
Yeah.
I should know that, but I wondered what the latest
Yeah, but I didn't want to say anything, Trevor.
That's all right.
So yes, it is on the plan. As you know, there's been some training development. It's been a little bit slower GRS right now with a number of things going on, but it is one of the things that we wanted to put forward and embed it a bit more and expand it a bit more in some of our current learnings.
Rochelle here. I have a question. I just wanted to circle back to some of the amendment stuff, and there was talk about when there's changes to legislation that might initiate a change in an ORCS that's already been developed. Is there anywhere that kind of gets into like what kind of legislative changes? Because I've had experiences where clients are like, oh, our legislation has changed, and it's like, well, does your legislation talk about retention? Like, is there some reason that you think that the ORCS is impacted? And I mostly think that the legislation doesn't speak to retention. And so I don't understand what types of legislative changes would initiate a change to the ORCS.
Mm-hmm. So kind of like we mentioned, really we'd have to look at the legislation to see where it is. So if it's a piece of legislation where something has been expanded or added to the legislation, but it doesn't actually have to do with that classification or that retention, et cetera. It's kind of out of scope of that schedule. Obviously doesn't affect it. But in all other cases, even a small amendment could have an impact. So when government adds in new programs, in addition, or they expand on a current program, typically there is some impact for the records and the classification.
So like this primary used to, address, intake and output or whatever. And now it's intake, output, and all these other little animals.
Correct.
As well. That's the scenario where.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Like the one that comes to mind, I'm trying not because I know we're being recorded, but, on stuff like when we introduce cannabis, or when we do new initiatives of government to increase or decrease homelessness, even though they might be relying on current legislation that's in existence or has been in existence, they have touched that legislation and expanded on it, which could have an impact on the actual schedule and how we maintain the records. It might mean that we keep the records for as long, but maybe the criteria of what we do for selective retention might change or something like that. So for that reason, we actually look through the legislation and see if it impacts the schedule.
Yeah, I think an example maybe, and the other archivists on the call can correct me if this is wrong, but I believe the Limitations Act changed a few years ago where we were keeping records for 7 years, but now it's been reduced down to 2 years. So that could potentially impact retention periods in different ORCS that may be citing the Limitation Act, or it might change how we do retentions in the future. So it's just kind of little things like that we have to be aware of.
And also with things like some people don't realize it, but even when programs are moving, say to another agency, so it's moving, this program is moving now to the federal government or et cetera, then definitely would come back and look at how that is, because there's some kind of mechanism now to transfer that and determine what is going to be staying with the ministry and what is going to be going to that other form of government. So even in those cases, we really should be looking at the schedule again.
I think we have time for maybe one more question, comment. Okay.
I have one more question. I was recently asked by a client what the ETA would be on this project being completed and functioning.
So for clients, it's a double answer for you.
Okay.
So one, clients can actually start using this handbook. Actually, we encourage clients to start using this handbook so they can actually start working through those beginning tabs that we've created and provide feedback, like actually live feedback using the handbook. I've estimated out that if a client actually started kind of now, we would actually probably be running in tandem with them. The handbook would be like, they wouldn't notice that the handbook's not done. Like they wouldn't jump ahead of us in any way. So they can start it now. The goal is to have the handbook by the end of December. However, we do want it to be living. So it's not going to be a document that, here's a manual and, go refer to that manual. It's been approved and it's done. Our intent is that this handbook is going to be a living document. So, kind of like what Trevor was bringing up with the kind of those story interviews, it'd be great to add those kind of things in. So we're hoping that this handbook, as it keeps getting used, is constantly going to be updated, modified, and living. So yes, our goal is the end of December, but in essence, we hope never, because we want to see it evolve and become simpler to use and add in things and stuff like that.
Thanks.
Welcome.
Okay. I think we are nearing the end of our time here. So I just wanted to thank everyone for all the excellent feedback and questions today. Thank you so much for taking the time to attend. I know taking an hour out of your days, it's quite a bit these days. Everyone's fairly busy. But I know that there's probably way more feedback that you are wanting to give us. So please don't hesitate to reach out to Elizabeth or Katie or myself with any feedback you have once you get time to dig deeper into the handbook. We are planning on sending out a very simple survey to you all. It's just going to be a couple of questions. Won't take more than a couple of minutes. So look at your email in the next week or two for that survey to complete. And I'm hoping that we can continue to survey all of our stakeholders on an ongoing basis to find out how we're doing and how you're liking the handbook. Also, I'll be sending out an invite for our next sprint review, which will be in 3 weeks from now. Feel free to forward that to others that you think may be interested. Our meetings are open and welcoming to anyone who is interested. But I think that's pretty much it from us. Thank you so much once again. And we'll see you all in 3 weeks.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, team. Great job.
Thanks.